Well, hello folks, I'm LA Little with TA Today, and what we're going to do here today is look at the SOXX, and we're going to look at it and ask ourselves, hey, what's likely next? Where's it going? We're going to look at the top 5 stocks in it, come to some conclusions about it, so let's start there. So if you watch my videos, you know that I line these charts up on 3 time frames. Got a daily here, a weekly over here, a monthly at that pace. I've got my trading cube down here, and here's my ABCD projection structures. It pretty much gives me everything that I need all on one nice little screen. So what I'm doing when I'm looking at the SOXX is I'm saying, okay, what has this thing done and what is it probably going to do? But before we do that, let's just get some stuff out of the way. You know, why the SOXX? Why use it versus like maybe the SMH? You know, we could use either one of them, but SMH is a little bit more top heavy. The top 2 stocks in that account for 35% of the weighting. Whereas if you look at the SOXX, it's 20% the top 2. So it's not as top heavy. NVDA is a huge position in the SMH. But the charts, they look almost the same. They're not that different. So I prefer, if you're going to use an ETF, just use one that's broader. I mean, that's usually the point of buying an ETF, is that you get a little bit more diversification. So if we go back to the SOXX and look at it, and we say to ourselves, okay, what is it doing? Well, the first thing you have to realize is that this thing just broke out again, right? Just got over a swing point high, broke higher. It's at 51% here. That's not too bad. 29 over there, not too bad. In other words, this thing is not stretched. This thing can go higher. So the SOXX as an ETF is not overextended in any way. And the fact that it just broke a swing point high says that the first thing you have to watch for is a retest. Well, that's exactly what happened on Friday. Started to come right back in and retest into that zone. In other words, once you break a swing point high, which is what we did on this bar, you can expect within 1 to 2 bars, most of the time, it's going to come back in and retest it, and that's what it's doing. If it gets under it, if it closes underneath the low of the swing point high, that's a retest regen failure. That tells you that more than likely you've got some sort of a range setting up on this time frame. Notice here that you've got another swing point high below it. That one also has not broken. Now it tested, got down to the bottom of it here, got down to the bottom of it there, but never broke it. If you come back in this again, more than likely you're going to break it, which means you're going to set up a range. You're going to go back all the way to this one. And so this becomes critical, this part right here. In other words, if we close down below it, more than likely we're going to break this one as well, which means we're probably going to get set up in a range. That's what you have to be thinking right now. Is a range going to develop? You know that this thing's been on a tear, right? Right now we don't know that this is going to break. But what you want to do is put your eyeballs on it and say, hey, may that one break. If it does, right, there's my eyeballs. I got to do something. You know, if I've been long and strong this thing, I got to do something. Maybe I take a little profit. Maybe I start trying to think about trading that range, and we'll talk about that later. Now, the SOXX is made up of other stock. And what's the big one? Well, in both SMH and SOXX, it's NVDA. Not nearly as much in SOXX, but 10% of it. What is it doing? Well, NVIDIA had its big jump on earnings. If you notice here, it went down, broke a swing point low. That swing point low was right there and it broke. You got under it, you get the huge pop back up, turn bullish again. That's why this is not very high yet. But you can't get any follow through. There's no follow through on Friday. Now, one day doesn't make a market, and so maybe this was just profit taking after a huge jump. Maybe it's something more. But it is notable that the stock that sent everything in a frenzy on the way up again was unable to get any kind of a follow through on the next day. Now, it has a huge ABCD projection out there. Of course, that's long term, so we're looking at an ABCD that's way over here. But in the meantime, notice here, 87 on the MTTF cumulative, 90 on the long term. These things need resets. How do you get resets? You break a swing point low. Where's the swing point low here? Well, it's way down here, but that's not the one that's going to count. What's going to happen is you're going to get one printed higher on this time frame. Let's just blow that out so we can see it. Where will we print it most likely? Well, if you take that and you count out 6 bars, that's going to be right there. And so that is the bar you want to look at. That's down around 590. Can it get back there? Well, I guess in time, but the first things first, you got to do something with the daily. You got to set up a range over here on the daily. How would you do that? Well, same thing we just looked at on SOXX. You got to break a swing point high, retest, regen. It's going to be hard to do on NVDA. NVIDIA 10% of the weighting on the SOXX. More than likely, this is not going to be a stock that leads things back down, at least not immediately. If we look at the next highest weighting on the SOXX itself. That's AMD. And AMD set up with a dark candle as well on Friday. Did not break out like the rest of them. This one's already in a range. So we're talking about a range on the SOXX. Well, here's what a range looks like. There's your range. Can it get deeper? Yeah, it can. Has it done anything special in between? Well, yeah, it actually has a retest regen right here, right now, and it's doing the retest immediately. If that breaks, you're going to go to the bottom of the range. If you break these swing point lows, that's going to drive you to the swing point high. That would just create a larger range. And right now you can see the range that's over here. Where would the larger range be on the weekly? Well, that would just take it down into this area down here. And so you can see on the charts where that sets up. Now, the nice thing about it on almost all of these charts is that when you go to the monthly time frames, they all look pretty strong. And if we look at AVGO, the way this one sets up, just broke a swing point high. Where's the swing point high? Right there. So the little narrow one. Coming back in to do retest regen on the very next bar, just like the rest of them. You got another retest regen over here. So it's going to be hard to break this thing down on the first one. But you know, if it did break the first one, that says you're probably in a range, and that means you're going to trade the range, which is probably about that deep. These aren't deep enough to probably play. I mean, you're looking at 100 points on a base of 13. Some quick calculation tells us that's about probably, I guess, about 7.5. But again, all these things are set up basically the same way, right? Where they could come back and do some more work to the downside because they didn't get follow through. They got dark candles, they didn't get follow through. What you really want to look at, and we'll talk about in the conclusion, is that follow through and what does it mean? And what are we going to look for on Monday and Tuesday to tell us something more? Let's take the last two real quick here. Qualcomm's the next one. Qualcomm's stock also no follow through on Friday. It didn't even get back to the highs. This one's already in a range. Well, I would say it's potentially in a range. What you really want to see is you want to see it break a swing point low if it's going to be in a range. Finally, we'll look at the last one, which is definitely not as strong, which is Intel. Intel had earnings, got popped pretty good. It's down in a range at a lower base level now. This one is not going to lead it higher. So when you look at all of these, you look at NVDA, AMD, AVGO, the last two, Qualcomm, Intel, not nearly as strong. NVIDIA, of course, the leader right now of the top 5 weightings. Conclusion, what would be my conclusion from all of this? Well, there's really little evidence on the SOXX itself of a top. I mean, this thing could just continue to extend. There's nothing to tell us this is a top yet. It doesn't have to reset. It's not necessarily going to reset, but you don't have good follow through on Friday, and that's a problem. How will we know? Well, the first thing we do, we just let the market tell us. You know, don't jump to any conclusions. Just let the market tell you. If it's going to be a range, it has to break a retest regen to even begin to a range. And so the first retest regen is there, and again, the second one is just below it. If it breaks the first, it probably will break the second, which means it probably is a range. So if we get the break, maybe you want to take some profit. You know, you don't have to take it all off because long term, this thing still looks very strong. You know, on a weekly, it looks very strong. On a monthly, it looks very strong. But ideally, if you think this thing's going to trade 10, 12, 14% lower, unless I'm thinking wrong here, I'd want to take some profits on the break and, you know, try to get something out in this area rather than wait and potentially, you know, sell it deeper. I want to be buying down here and not selling down there. And so the only way you buy down there is either you got deep pockets or you sold something up here. So if the range trade develops, you want to try and trade that range. I would look to play things just on the long side though, because to me, this is a one-way range. One-way ranges is when you have strong moves up and then a range develops up there. You don't short strong moves up. You have to get something more than that. You got to break something more serious. In other words, you have to break a swing point low. As a matter of fact, where would the swing point low for this, which doesn't need to be broken yet, but where would it develop? Well, looks like it's going to be that bar right there. And assuming you don't break it within 6 bars, so another 3 or 4 weeks, that thing's going to develop a swing point low. That would be a break. That would be something more major, but that's a long way off. Right now, we're looking at something more minor, potentially a range developing from about 582 up to about 650. And that's a fairly large range. Just buy the low end of it, sell the high end of it. Will it happen? We don't know. We wait and let the market tell us. Have a great one. Take care. I'll see you next time.